The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, February 5th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Professor of History at Vanderbilt University, Sarah Igo, on The Known Citizen, a history of privacy in modern America. Also on the program today, the Southern District of New York, digging deep into the Trump inauguration files, subpoenas issued. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi's aide tells insurance executives, we won't be pushing for Medicare for all. And oh yeah, Trump giving a State of the Union address tonight. Stacey Abrams with a response. Meanwhile, Democratic voters care less about policy than beating Trump, according to Democratic voters. And is the U.S. government behind blocking the travel of journalists and immigrant rights lawyers to Mexico? Meanwhile, the Trump is shut down on his national emergency gambit. And surprise, surprise, Donald Trump's Interior Department head is a former oil lobbyist. Lastly, AOC readies her Green New Deal bill as details are revealed. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us. We will be tonight. This will be our first broadcast of the day. As you know, we always like to do multiple shows a day. And
we
tonight,
actually really kind of do if you broaden that out.
It depends. We usually that's true. But Tuesdays is usually two shows emanating out of the studio. Anyways, tonight, however, will be the State of the Union address. Super excited. I'm sure all of you are very excited to hear what Donald Trump has to say. I actually am excited to see Stacey Abrams speak in response. That is always a thankless job. And very few people have come out of that with a more positive, I guess, glow around them than they went in. Although there's been a couple. I thought Kennedy did okay last time, and Jim Webb years ago. But
Jim Webb years ago supposedly crushed it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true, right?
Yeah. But yes, he did quite well. So we shall see. But excited to see that. And, of course, I'm also excited to see the sixth grader that Donald Trump has invited to the State of the Union, who apparently is picked on because his last name is Trump. I could tell you.
The one that matters is me.
That's right.
I'm the only one that matters.
You know, I really empathize with that kid.
Why doesn't the New York Times write a nice article about me? I'm my hometown paper.
I'm entitled to at least one.
So,
I came from Jamaica Estates.
We will be starting around 8:30. We will also be drinking, is my sense, and probably heavily. And so do join us. Do join us for that this evening. let's play this this clip. I'm so torn as to which one.
Go with your gut.
Let's go with the first one that we saw. We'll do the other one about the State of the Union later. That is just, Now
it does line up the question of tonight.
Now look, I don't know. Well, yeah, we can ask that question later. We'll do that one at the end of the show. AOC is releasing her Green New Deal shortly, so of course Fox News is on a 24-hour state of alert, and they keep it on their chyron. But here they have what's this guy's name again now?
Charles Payne.
Yeah, Charles Payne. They bring him on, and this clip fascinated me because I got totally misdirected. I thought where this was going. Now, I want you to listen to this conversation. They're talking about the polling that shows that people support a wealth tax that Elizabeth Warren is proposing. They support AOC's tax to 70% on the top marginal rate of $10 million or over. They're going to support Bernie Sanders' similar call for such taxation as well. They're really amazed about it. But Payne makes an argument that, you listen, but I want you to just, as you hear Payne talk, right? There's three people here. There's Bill Hemmer, who's not going to say very much. Sometimes he gets a little bit of a stomach virus,
He's enjoying
I think,
himself.
If you know what I mean. And
Enjoying himself. Yeah, maybe a little bit more enjoyable than a stomach virus.
Yeah, and I don't. Who is the other? I don't know. The other host on Fox. And Hemmer's just sitting there looking a little goofy, and then Payne comes on. So I want you just to think as Payne starts to talk about his argument, like where you think it's going, because it throws it. He does a double Lindy as far as I'm concerned. Go ahead.
There is what seems to be a movement against capitalism in this country. This is a piece in Politico just published.
Pause it for 1 second. We should say that taxation is a big part of capitalism. It really is a big part. I mean, there's nothing anti-capitalist about taxation. In many respects, first of all, taxation is the only thing that gives our money value, or I should say is the primary thing that gives our money value. It is the but for. If the government did not take taxes in U.S. dollars, your money would not have much value. That's just the reality of it, folks. But putting that aside, there is an anti-capitalist sentiment growing in the United States. She's just not picking out the right things that are indicating it.
Soak the rich. Americans say go for it. In this piece, it talks about how recent polling is showing that the American public is increasingly on board with raising taxes on the rich. As evidence, we pulled up this latest Fox News poll on the issue, whether Americans support raising taxes on the wealthy, on incomes over $10 million. Those that are in favor of that, 70%, Charles. Over $1 million in income, 65% are in favor of raising taxes.
Pause it for 1 second. I'm also super impressed with how sort of incredulous she seems like.
I mean, doesn't that just seem so beyond commonsensical?
She is a good actress, right? Like
Yeah.
you feel like she could be delivering like, oh my God, there's a doorknob on that door.
It's not butter.
But she does sound like she's talking about like AOC is actually proposing like putting the head of Exxon in jail.
Right, exactly.
Well, if they ask the question, like, should we tax 70% of their total income over $10 million? Or, it seems like people don't understand marginal tax rates still when they're answering this question, which makes it even more impressive.
Right.
Over $1 million in income, 65% are in favor of raising taxes.
The idea of fairness has been promoted in our schools for a long time. And we're starting to see kids who grew up in this notion that fairness above all. And now they're becoming voting age, and they're bringing this ideology with them.
So explain your misdirection.
Do you get that?
Explain
as soon
it.
as he starts talking about fairness, I thought he was going to say, look, kids are taught about fairness in school. And it is unfair to ask the rich to pay more. But no, he is bemoaning the fact that the idea of fairness is gaining traction in society.
This should be the new tagline of MR, by the way. Fairness above all.
Right.
The majority report.
Sorry, we believe in fairness. We're gonna be handing out a nice big dose of fairness. Get used to it.
Caution, you're about to enter an all fairness zone.
He's bemoaning the fact that fairness is becoming an ascendant ideology.
It's his fairness warriors.
Social fairness warrior.
SFW.
That's actually much more what I am. I'm a social fairness warrior.
And not just social. EFW.
Oh, yeah.
Economic fairness.
I'm a big-time economic fairness warrior.
Look at this guy. Really, honestly, are there really people listening to Fox, watching Fox going like, ugh, fairness? What's next?
Yeah, there are a handful of old people who should be frankly
boring.
assembling a class action lawsuit against these people for jacking their cortisol levels up every day, who probably are just being like, that's like Venezuela. I bet they were all about fairness in Venezuela.
How much fairness are they going to just keep heaping on us?
Just so bored of fairness.
Oh, my God. That is...
We get it, fair.
They are so turned around now. Like they have to resort towards sort of fake astonishment that 70% want to tax people over the first $10 million. Like, really? Really? Are they? Did they think they took this poll in the commissary in Fox? Like, you know, we only polled the hosts of Fox News, and that was surprising.
I mean, like him running around like, no, don't ask the fucking makeup person.
Oh my gosh, exactly.
I guess they're not still using the slogan "fair and balanced," are they?
Oh, disgusting!
Ooh. That's
it's coming from inside the house.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Folks, today support for today's show comes from Third Love. Using millions of real women's measurements, Third Love designs bras with breast size and shape in mind for an impeccable fit and an incredible feel. Just to answer a few simple questions from Third Love's Fit Finder quiz to find your perfect fit. Third Love offers double the number of sizes most brands offer, cups A through H, bands up to 48, and with lightweight memory foam cups, straps that won't slip, tagless labels. You'll want to wear these soft, breathable bras and underwear every day, especially the new cotton t-shirt bras and underwear. Thanks to the 100% fit guarantee, returns and exchanges are free and easy. Maybe even fair.
A fair policy for a show built on the foundation of fairness.
So we have We recruited a special bra wearer for to get an endorsement, because I obviously don't wear bras, and so I can't really assess
obvious,
them.
But okay,
I don't. This is what we heard back. I love that they don't have a zillion options. It's easy to choose something quickly. The fit is great. I usually have to return most bras I order online, even though they're in my size. I ordered 2, both fit. That almost never happens. Super comfortable for an everyday bra, but not as boring as most t-shirt bras. Subtle, cute details, so I don't feel basic. There you go, folks. Third Love knows there's a perfect bra for everyone. So right now, they're offering my listeners 15% off your first order. Go to thirdlove.com/majority. Find your perfect fitting bra. Get 15% off your first purchase. That's thirdlove.com/majority for 15% off. Also, folks, you spend 1/3 of your life in your sheets. I spend about, I would say, 75% of that staring at the ceiling.
Really that high?
I have trouble sleeping. Damn. But I love my sheets. It's about time for a bedding upgrade for you folks. Founded in early 2014, Brooklinen is the fastest growing bedding brand in the world with over 30,000 5-star reviews, 500,000 happy sleepers, and counting. Their mission is to make 5-star hotel-quality sheets that are affordable and easy to order. And since they believe that sheets should look great in addition to feeling great, they offer over 20 colors and patterns. You can mix and match. I now have 4 sets of Brooklinen sheets.
What kind of colors you got going on?
I got stripes. So they discontinued the stripes. And so I got the reverse stripe. So I've got the hard stripes, and then I have the, it's sort of like gray with like tiny white stripes. So the absence of gray, I guess. If you want to put it that way. Well, it depends on how
poetic
you...
relationship
depends on
to
how
your
you,
sheets.
but I love
like
them.
it.
I get the crisp, cool cotton ones, and I love them. They're incredibly comfortable. I know they're going to last a long time. Cotton sheets like this, I've had sets of those in the past for ages, and I love them. My Brooklyn sheets are the best, most comfortable sheets I have ever slept on. And now it's time for your upgrade. Brooklinen.com is giving an exclusive offer for just my listeners. Get $20 off and free shipping when you use promo code majority at brooklinen.com. Brooklinen is so confident in their product that all their sheets, comforters, and towels come with a lifetime warranty. The only way to get $20 off and the free shipping, use the promo code majority at brooklinen.com. That's brooklinen.com, BROOKLINEN.com, promo code majority. Brooklinen, these really are the best sheets ever. And lastly, got a new sponsor, and Kelly helped out with this. Old Kelly.
This is cool.
Your dog's health is as important as every other member of your family, and it starts with what you feed them. Ollie offers vet-formulated recipes, fully transparent ingredients to give your dog the healthiest food possible. We're talking real, all-natural, that even people can eat. I don't know that you want to do that, but no preservatives and sourced from U.S. family farms. No wonder Ollie beat out store-bought dog food at a 10-to-1 on the palatability scale. Try for yourself. Just go to myollie.com. Answer a few questions about your dog. They'll ship custom recipes and pre-proportioned meals straight to your door on a regular schedule. Shipping is free, and if your dog doesn't like the meals, they have a money-back guarantee. Best of all, Ollie is offering our listeners 60% off your first box plus a free bag of treats at myollie, MYOLLIE.com/try/majority. So that's a tricky one. myollie.com/try/majority. Check it out. This is what Kelly said about Ollie. She said, Edie loves Ollie. Spent a lot of time cooking for my elderly dog. So when I got Edie as a puppy, I was relieved I didn't have to cook anymore and could feed her store-bought kibble, but I knew it wasn't the best for her health, and I've always felt a bit guilty. Ollie is an amazing solution for dog owners like me. The delivery was fast. The packaging was 100% recycled and biodegradable. Took me a couple answers to answer a few questions about my dog, and Ollie recommended one of their recipes. The order arrived within 2 days. The instructions were simple. Phase Ollie into Edie's diet using portions based on the scoop they provided. Store the food in the fridge using the reusable lid they provided. There was no reason to phase in the food, despite the fact that every other food change has given Edie a little bit of adjustment. Ollie meals were easy for her to digest. She's excited when I take the food out of the fridge. I plan on using Ollie moving forward, even if it's only to mix with her kibble. Human-grade food is clearly what she prefers, and it's the best for her health. Kelly's very excited about it. Go to myollie.com/try/majority for 60% off, plus a free bag of treats. Spelled MYOLLIE.com/try, TRY/majority. All right, quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Professor Sarah Igo. Right back after this. Seder on the Majority Report. On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program Professor of History at Vanderbilt University, author of The Known Citizen, A History of Privacy in Modern America. Sarah Igo, thanks so much for coming onto the program.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start. Let's start with the title. It is a reference to a poem by W.H. Auden from 1940, The Unknown Citizen. What was it about that that poem that spurred the title?
I'm so glad you asked that. It's a lovely poem. It is, as you say, from 1940, and a poem that charts the life of a man who is anonymous. He's never named in the poem, but is known by all kinds of different agencies in the society. You know, his creditors, his doctors, labor union, journalists, pollsters, and so forth. And when I stumbled upon it, it just spoke to me in a way that it captured a dilemma for Americans around privacy, which is both their desire to be known and their desire to be unknown at the same time, or maybe better, their desire to be known as they wish, but usually aren't. So it really, I don't know, in a kind of very succinct way seemed to capture up many of the themes that I was thinking about in terms of the history of American debates over privacy, and to eloquently, lay them in front of us.
Let's talk. I feel like it's too broad of a question to ask, like, what is privacy? But I think that's sort of the in many respects that's the point of the book, is that it shifts, the concept of it shifts over time, and you start to track it basically at the beginning of the 20th century, just a little bit maybe before that. So let's do that. I mean, in terms of, and hit some of the milestones, but when did the concept of privacy really become most, establish itself on the scene, as it were, within the context of society?
Sure. So, I mean, privacy, I think, is a very old human concept, even if it's been, taken different forms. So I would not say it began in any simple way in the late 19th century, which is where I begin the book. But what I do want to argue is that privacy became a kind of public issue, a political issue, for the first time for many people in American society. And that it never really left the stage thereafter. Obviously not today, but really for all the years in between. So what happens in the late 19th century is that a series of developments, the kind of creation of the national mass media, some technological innovations, photography, instantaneous photography, fingerprinting, a whole bunch of other things, start to create a crisis in the boundaries around private persons, and to raise questions about what could and should be known about Americans. How should they be known to the broader society? So it's sparked in the first instance really by new technologies and new media. So in some ways, it has some interesting correspondences, I think, to our own moment. But, more than a century ago, we're talking about the 1880s and 1890s, when candid photographs could be circulated easily for the first time, could be printed in the newspaper, where people could be caught unawares and recorded by new kinds of devices. This will provoke for a couple of lawyers the first modern call for the right to privacy, which is in 1890 in the Harvard Law Journal.
And
that's a beginning point. Yeah.
And I want to get to that concept that Brandeis, forwarded, but so at that time, right? I mean, it seems to me that when we're talking right around then too, it's like there's a question of like privacy as anonymity, privacy as sort of control over your domain, and I imagine too, we're talking about an era where for most people, they didn't have a huge amount of property, right? Personal property or whatnot. and there wasn't necessarily. I mean, I guess there's also a question of like, who can enter my domicile in some way, and all these things get implicated with the technology, and then, as you say, this concept of the right to be left alone is privacy. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So the older ideas about privacy in the United States, certainly legal ideas, had to do with this property idea, right? One's home, a man's home is his castle, which comes out of old Anglo-American law. And what really changes in the late 19th century is that those borders no longer seem to protect the people that they used to protect, which was generally, white propertied men, to really sort of sum up, who privacy had protected in the past. But suddenly, new kinds of communications technologies, virtual technologies like photography could kind of cross those borders and boundaries. So, in the first instance, this privacy crisis really is a crisis around upper middle class property rights, and the privileged people in American society suddenly realizing they can be witnessed and observed and captured on film and sort of trotted out in the scandal press in a new way. But it doesn't stay there for long. And in fact, this idea that people might have a right to protections from not just physical intrusions, but virtual intrusions travels really far, really quickly. So you get suits in the late 19th century, some of the earliest right to privacy suits that are actually coming from women whose photographs, whose images are being used in advertising in all kinds of ways that they didn't authorize, didn't even know about oftentimes. And start claiming a right to privacy that is not about, break-ins into one's home or property, but really about incursions on one's reputation, one's image, one's public persona, one's dignity. And so the notion of privacy really changes from one that's based in property, never fully escapes that, but that's really grounded in property, to one that's more grounded in personality, which is the term that Louis Brandeis and Samuel Warren will use in that 1890 Harvard Law Review essay.
Now, is there a distinction at that time between the idea of like, okay, you took my picture, you used it for an advertisement, the concept of privacy versus sort of you've taken my you've taken my property, you've taken my my what we would now, I guess, call on some level intellectual property, right? Or I mean, because it's interesting that this that we start to see these suits in the context of, and maybe that's why we only see them in the context of civil suits, but in terms of like issues of exploitation of people's of things that people don't want to put into the marketplace, but it's an exploitation as opposed to just simply like a leering.
Right. Well, so that's a really interesting question. It's first of all, this market is totally unregulated in the late 19th century. There are no rules about circulation of photographs yet. And so actually there are a number of different reasons one might wish to protest one's image being circulated, but the most common ones are not about having some sort of financial interest or propertied interest in that sense, but more so about the kind of embarrassment or shame of having one's face kind of paraded around in commercial culture, which particularly for women could seem quite scandalous. I mean, it was to have yourself mixed up in the market and in commercial transactions was akin, in some readings to prostitution or, to a kind of unsavory public presence. So there were a number of different ways that this could play out, but I think that it's really a later development of people wanting to profit from, say, their image or to capitalize on their image, and so they're getting more into kind of intellectual property sorts of rights, or the sort of celebrity rights over their image, a right to publicity actually, which is related in odd ways to a right to privacy.
And
the right to profit from publicity, that is.
Okay, and so then as we move into the pre, I guess, New Deal era, where sort of the concept of privacy changes. Where are we there? Like what? I mean, it's interesting because we don't have this fear really of the government when it comes to privacy, right? It's just other actors around us.
Yeah, well, in the 19th century, that's pretty much true. I mean, certainly there are cases where, and they're sort of memorialized, right, in American law in a way about quartering soldiers or, right, the government breaking down the door. But that was not a very live or regular concern for most Americans in the 19th century, actually. And where the threat comes from is actually commercial entities, other private entities in the first instance. But in the 20th century, as you point out, there starts to be a growing fear about the administrative state, about what the state knows about people, how it is tracking people, as a kind of more fully blown social welfare state comes into play. And as more people are paying taxes in the 20th century, people are starting to benefit from federal social programs like Social Security. There's a new regime of documentation around birth certificates. To travel out of the country, one needs a passport. So all of these documents, which seem age old but are actually pretty new inventions, come onto the scene and create a new set of worries about documentation, identification by various kinds of state bureaucracies. And I should say not only state bureaucracies even there, because we're also talking about credit agencies and what they know about Americans. Some worry starts to creep in there, too, in the early 20th century. So fears or discussions, debates around privacy change, not to be about just sort of publicity and exposure, but start to encompass worries about information and about what we would now call data privacy or information privacy. People didn't call it that then, but they were clearly starting to worry about all the different kind of pieces of information that various kinds of authorities, private or public, knew about them.
And so this is as we develop into what you call a knowing society, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so, I mean, I'm really fascinated because I wasn't aware, because I was aware that the Social Security number was supposed to be highly limited and in terms of its use. And then, of course, it ultimately became far more abused, and we have a lot more problems associated with identity theft and whatnot at this point. But I didn't realize how excited people were about the Social Security number because of the implications it had in terms of government. And I wonder how much of the development of, and we'll get to how people's perspective on privacy shifted, I think, in the Cold War because there was, an agenda being set there. But I wonder how much of that sort of table setting was there with the idea of people, because it seems like most of the concern about the Social Security number at that time were of opponents of the idea of Social Security in and of itself. But speak about the different currents of excitement, because I just didn't realize how that people, I think at one point you're saying people were tattooing their Social Security numbers on them. This, of course, is before the Holocaust, and where such tattoos meant something totally different. But people wearing dog tags with it. Talk about that era and the differing views on the Social Security number.
Sure, yeah. This was one of the biggest surprises to me when doing research for this book. I had actually turned to Social Security numbers because I expected that there we would see this early privacy debate about information, right? The state, all of a sudden, first of all, putting a number on people, and then second, being able to use that number to, as a kind of index to their work history, financial lives, and so forth. And there was a little bit of that, although much of the early pushback against Social Security numbers was, as you say, about opponents of the program or about big government or about tracking of union members in particular. And there were some other scattered concerns. But what really bowled me over was the embrace of these numbers as identifying numbers that would show citizens, would prove, citizen status to the government as deserving of support, whether for unemployment benefits or for welfare retirement benefits. So there's this really rich kind of material history that I started digging into of people getting jewelry with their Social Security numbers. Emblazoned on it, special bronze plates that they would display in their homes, getting their dentures, marked with their Social Security number, and then this trend that was, never huge, but was not all that small either, of people getting their Social Security numbers tattooed on their bodies, permanently making that number part of their identity as a kind of badge of pride and belonging, economic citizenship. You could look at those in a number of different ways, but certainly not hiding them, and certainly not treating that number as a kind of private fact about themselves. On the contrary, sometimes really broadcasting that number. And that really carries all the way through the 30s and 40s and into the 50s, and it really only starts to change dramatically in the 1960s, when Social Security numbers start entering into new computer data banks and start getting linked in new ways to other pieces of information.
Before we get to there, too, though, I'm also fascinated by the idea that the Social Security number was received in part because the concerns that many people had was less about the government and more about their bosses. It seems like the Social Security number was like, okay, here's my token. You no longer have to know what religion I am, or what my marital status is, or what all these other things. Here's the token that just, this if this number's okay, then I'm okay. Is that basically the dynamic? Yeah. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's right. And also the fact that workers had been surveilled by their employers for a long time. There was a lot of distrust and skepticism about employers' intent. And actually, here was the federal government coming in as an intermediary and securing certain kinds of things for workers. And what workers were really worried about was not the government having their information, but making sure the employers would not have access to the government's stashes of information. So that was a really interesting discovery that really, just tells you that relationships between Americans and the state were different, right? And private agencies were different than they are today. And we shouldn't assume that their privacy fears were the same as ours, right? Those relationships have really changed over the course of the last century.
I find that so fascinating, and I'm not, I think I come with my own predispositions, but I can't help but think that a combination of the Cold War, where we were sold this notion of how dangerous a government could be, right, in terms of and that there was an agenda or a value to the employer class to sever that relationship that people were feeling between them and their government, and that they wanted to make them more skeptical of their government.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it, this is the Social Security number is a nice case, both because Americans seem more trusting than we might expect as a federal government, but also because even though corporate America was very invested in not letting Social Security pass, which of course it did, leapt on the possibilities of the Social Security number for surveilling their employees. So I talk about this in some detail in the book, but employers started creating their own fictitious surveys of employees, claiming that they were related to them getting a Social Security number, which they asked for much more extensive information about their personal lives than the federal government ever did. So yeah, that relationship, I think. Is worthy of a second look, right? About the kind of shifting ways in which corporations have both led distrust in the United States and also have fostered distrust in other big agencies, namely the federal government.
That's fascinating, and to what extent, too, and I guess maybe this runs parallel to this, but the idea of who was deserving privacy expands in some way, and I wonder if where the Social Security number comes in that respect too, because that is, on some level, it's the great equalizer, right? I mean, like everybody gets a number, and to say you're all just a number, in some ways, maybe dehumanizing, but it's also quite egalitarian.
Yeah, it is. Although, of course, not everybody did get a number, and there were racial disparities.
Yeah, of course. And we have spoken about this on this program, and there should be an asterisk on everything that we're talking about in this context. We're talking about a narrow set of Americans, or I should say, maybe a wide set, but there were certainly huge swaths of Americans who were left out. People of color and women were, in some respects, targeted to not receive Social Security benefits at that time.
That's right. But, the larger point I think is really important, and often, especially these days when we're so concerned about documentation and identity theft and data breaches, the larger point is that, identification by the federal government, being visible to the federal government in this case because of a benefits program, was very, very, very valuable. It was a kind of prized possession, and this is why Social Security numbers played a different role in Americans' lives then, right? So to hold on to this number, to be able to recall it, to be able to, produce it, was seen as something really precious. So, of course, its history would zigzag on from there and start, we now think of them quite differently. But documentation and identification could be really, really sought after kinds of statuses for Americans, right? So anyway, I feel like that's a really important point to make because it helps us see that there's not an inevitable relationship between kind of negative surveillance and documentation, right? There can be other arrangements, yeah.
And then that everything turns a little bit south, in part because there's a desire to make the Soviet Union more nefarious, but also it seems in part because our government started to snoop on its own citizens in a particularly aggressive fashion, right? When we get into the late 60s and early 70s, and how does that impact privacy there? Because I imagine there's also this dynamic of, that there's a portion of the American public that's going, well, the government's, spying and but they're spying on all the right people in the country.
Right. Yeah. So there are actually, of course, long history of the U.S. government, the FBI, spying on citizens. It's on American citizens. But what changes, I suppose, in the mid-20th century is that this becomes much more obvious and much more publicized and politicized in a sense because it's not simply aliens and radicals as it was during World War I, but there's a kind of McCarthyist sweep and a real debate that breaks out about the reach of the federal government and its kind of inquisitorial powers at the same time as you have non-state actors that seem to have powers to intrude and invade into Americans' deeply intimate personal psychological lives through all kinds of new techniques. And some of those are adopted by the state and some aren't. But I'm thinking about things like the psychological exams, personality testing at the workplace, various kinds of experiments to see how far you can get into people's consciousness and so forth. And so a whole new domain opens up around psychological invasions in the 1950s and 60s, again, only partly furthered by the state, but certainly, gets more attention probably because of the public knowledge about U.S. surveillance of its own citizens and, undemocratic kinds of trials, and people losing their jobs because of suspected communist or radical associations. So the 50s and 60s sees this really quite anxious and urgent debate about the shrinking space of privacy in American life, and will give rise to certain kinds of solutions or remedies. One of which, not directly, but is, I think, in response to all of this, is, finally, a right to privacy as announced in the Supreme Court in 1965 on the case Griswold v. Connecticut, but also legislation, pretty far-reaching legislation like the Privacy Act of 1974. So there is a kind of response in terms of thinking about how to regulate and guard Americans' privacy, both their information privacy and their kind of privacy full stop. But those are not very effective remedies, and so the debate goes on.
Well, what's fascinating about that here is you have Griswold, which of course was about birth control, and ultimately became, in some respects, the foundation for Roe v. Wade. But simultaneously, you also had people moving what was previously considered in the private realm to more to the public realm, right? Like, I mean, broadly speaking, their sexuality and their other things are now more transparent. So there's like a paradox there. It's being almost like legalized on some, there's a legal structure that's being built, but society, the mores change.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, this is what makes privacy such a fascinating, but also really challenging topic, I think, to get our heads around, because lots of things are moving at any given point. And what does happen, I think the 70s are really critical for this. What's happening there is both more sensitivity to certain kinds of privacy invasions, one's data, identifying materials, anything that might be used in a kind of discriminatory fashion against them. At the same time that, yes, there's been a liberalization around certain kinds of personal material that would have been guarded very carefully in the 19th century and through the first half of the 20th century, but suddenly has been destigmatized. So sexuality, divorce, family dysfunction, alcoholism, and various kinds of medical conditions, right? So there were social movements that sort of were behind those, and were the feminist movement maybe first and foremost, but also gay liberation, also various kinds of other social movements that made those things as a political project less shameful, right? But at the same time, it's not as if there aren't other kinds of pieces of information that seem damaging in a different way. And this is where we start getting into worries that come along with a network society, with computer data banks, a computer that never forgets, as people would start to say. In the 1960s. So I think you see a kind of rise of information privacy concerns and calls to regulate corporate and government uses of identifying information, at the same time that you see a kind of freeing of other kinds of personal and intimate details. And that's not even getting, into the 80s and 90s and confessional memoirs and social media and blogs and so forth, right? It's already there, really, in the 1970s.
Right.
It's a psychological and a political movement, really.
So that so that dynamic carries through almost up until, this sort of, we're in a new age now, and I would imagine, so largely the story of your book is that privacy is a sort of in a constant, it's never static. It's a constantly changing concept, and I imagine now the departure. Particularly, I got to imagine. I have a teenage daughter, that the concept of privacy for her is so radically different than it has been at any other stage, right? Because so much of what had been considered private even 20 years ago is now we just throw that out the door now. We literally shove it out in the front yard.
Or the screen, or
right.
Whatever the equivalent is. Yeah. I mean, I think there are continuities, though, even in the differences. So I think, yes, absolutely. I mean, there is a kind of freedom with which people share certain kinds of personal narratives and experiences that would have been, utterly incomprehensible to someone like Louis Brandeis in 1890. On the other hand, to my mind, that some of the best studies of, say, teenage social media use, Dana Boyd's work, for example, suggests that teenagers are just as concerned about privacy as people have been. Their parents are, but in a different way, and are figuring out different ways on a new platform to protect information that they only want to share with a few or want to share with no one versus the kind of information they're willing to broadcast more widely. So I think the tension remains. I don't think what we're seeing is a kind of abandonment of privacy. In fact, on the contrary, I would say, looking historically, we're in a moment where people are thinking about and caring about privacy probably more than they have since at least the 1970s right now. So it's a little bit hard to decipher, but I think what we're seeing is a resetting of the terms, maybe, while also realizing how little control any of us has given what's already occurred, right? That so much of our information is already out there in the world, and we aren't going to be able to wrench it back in very easily. In fact, that's probably, a game we can't even play. So when I think about our current moment, what strikes me is that what we're seeing is that collision or the crossing of two different trends. One is this one we were talking about earlier, which is the kind of letting go of and destigmatizing of certain kinds of personal information, which has led people to very freely talk about, write about, share information about themselves, with an intensely profitable and sophisticated data mining, landscape that's come into place and was not related to that first trend, but is now able to use all that stuff that's out there in new ways and really threatening and unsettling ways. So I think that's generating our current debate and our current predicament, which is pretty hard one for us to resolve, obviously.
How much of that paradox is a function of like a push for, it seems to me, in the late 21st century, the late 20th century and the early 21st century, sort of a bunch of private public type initiatives, right? Which was a big push, which essentially, implies that the government trusts these private entities to do a lot of this stuff, right? Like, from prisons to farming out, immigration services, to farming out, to get data on behalf of the government, et cetera. And then there's sort of this whiplash with like, oh, wait a second. They have a different agenda, and we can't trust Facebook or whatnot.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, my historian self would say, well, of course, there have always been these very blurry lines between corporate America and the government. I'm thinking back to the kind of use of the telegraph lines by the federal government, ability to, sort of get into private communications and to subpoena corporate information, for example. So that goes way back, but I think, nevertheless, you're right that there has been a kind of tendency to both to privatize public goods or public functions, which is part of this. Even the Social Security number fits into this because a number that was meant to be only an identification of a federal account, essentially, retirement account, became a kind of number that was used by insurance agencies and credit bureaus and all kinds of other private corporations to do their work. So that kind of pooling or sharing of information, whether intentional or not, whether the U.S. government is cooperating with Google or Google is cooperating with the U.S. government, the fact that this information seems to be porous and accessible has certainly contributed to our current problems because it becomes very unclear who is responsible ultimately for what information is being collected, how it's being used, how it's moving around, whether it can be stopped, whether it can ever be erased. Those are I think some of our most important debates right now, and they're very hard to figure out because it's pretty unclear either technologically or politically what the limits to information sharing may be.
Indeed. It's a fascinating book, The Known Citizen, A History of Privacy in Modern America. Professor Sarah Igo, thanks so much for your time today. I also have to just add, it just occurs to me too, like that Social Security number, huge financial gift to the private industry, right? I mean, what would they do? What would they do if they didn't have that number?
Exactly.
Across platforms from everything to do with credit and identification. It's fascinating. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
They're totally unintended.
We will put a link to The Known Citizen at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm going to add that to my list of you think you built that? I would like to see 90%. Look, your landlords, your loans, your banking institutions, your phone companies, how many services ask for your Social Security number? And they all do that because of the tremendous amount of value they have in relying on that number and the information that sort of trails around with it. Businesses would not be able to function. You could have a million different like Equifaxes and this and that, but if there wasn't a standard number, you would be SOL.
You're welcome.
So you're welcome for that. Generic libertarian I'm having an argument with in my head.
How often does that happen during the day?
I would say like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, I would imagine. I could literally see you shuffling out of a post office or something and be like, exactly, and that's why that works. And you don't understand.
Honestly,
person in my head I'm arguing with who's dumb.
Honestly, I would say that happens at least like twice a day. I mean, I don't always land on something.
I was going to say maybe.
I don't always land on something 2 or 3 times a day at least. I'm not always landing on something. I could be reiterating something.
That's why I made the point before.
Like I said yesterday and the day before and the day before that and then the day before that.
No, that's when it gets really disturbing. You've really been brought into this when you're like in your apartment relitigating some argument with like a random caller from 6 months ago.
I got news for you.
Jesus Christ, I need to get away from Sam.
You just described my life. Just described my life.
What about the roads?
The only break I get from that is arguing with my daughter.
I was imagining, I could see your kids being like, "Dad, stop! You're frightening me."
Right.
Who built the roads? Dad, I need lunch. Stop! Exactly. You're scaring me.
Folks, just a reminder. Let's play that clip. I want to play that clip before we go. As a way of reminding you what's going to happen this evening on the show. Here is, this is CNN. Who is that dude? That's not, it's Avalon? Yeah. Jeez, that guy has been around for a long time. A lot of different incarnations.
I actually know where this guy got his start.
He used to work from Bloomberg.
Giuliani speechwriter.
He was Giuliani speechwriter. And then he migrated into being one of those guys like in the early aughts, I think, who was like sort of a centrist. Like he was heavily branded as a centrist. Oh, really? Is that right?
New York Times story about how there can be love across the aisle.
They're beloved across. Wait, which aisle are they? They're not on the same aisle. Center right. They're loved between the center right and the center righter.
I don't totally hate gay people, and we both support cutting capital gains. It's a really
it's not. I don't totally hate gay people. It's like I like the gay people I know in my own life.
Right.
But generally speaking, I'm not going to go to bat.
Or more, it's like gay people are fine. Black people are terrifying. Yeah. Cut the capital gains rate.
But nevertheless, he's been reborn as a CNN. He seems like more than a contributor here. He
does the reality checks.
Oh, thank you. We needed that. Here's a reality check for you tonight. You'd think it's just the State of the Union, but it's something else.
Welcome to Super Bowl for Policy Wonks. The State of the Union is here. And tonight, President Trump will
Pause
offer
it for 1 second. I imagine there's a lot of you who have just tried to commit suicide after but just to hang in there, it gets worse.
Maybe he was saying like the Super Bowl was boring this year.
I didn't find
giving him way too much credit.
I didn't find the Super Bowl boring. I thought it was pretty exciting, and I loved the way that it finished. But continue.
Welcome to Super Bowl for Policy Wonks. The State of the Union is here. And tonight, President Trump will offer his scripted vision of governing in a constitutionally mandated report to Congress. Now, he enters the arena with a robust economy, but barrel-scraping approval rating, fresh off the longest government shutdown in history. What's worse, a new CNN poll shows that 43% of Americans say the federal government's doing the worst job of governing in their lifetime. But there's always a chance that a strong speech could leave analysts saying that tonight was the night that Donald Trump finally became president.
I like how
hell yeah, dude.
He one steps that away from him, right? He doesn't say a good speech could be the night the president finally becomes president. He instead says that analysts could say that. That's the classic. Some say. I'm not
some
saying.
Say I could become president tonight.
Some say I could become.
Some people are saying I could be president tonight.
Tonight's the
some
night
people are
I could
saying
become
it.
president.
Well, analysts can be gullible, so
that
maybe he's right.
kid got
And
bullied because his
disingenuous
last name was Trump. I've never felt more just a what's that feeling where someone else's pain becomes your pain? I've never had that before, but this kid, he's got this beautiful last name. Beautiful last name. And they're mocking him.
Be best.
It just makes me feel it. What's that feeling in your stomach where you feel a concern for another human being?
I've heard people describe it to me. It's not hunger.
It's not hunger. It's not. I'm not hangry either. It feels like.
I'll tell you what's going to be fascinating.
It's what they said Schindler's List was like, but I fell asleep 5 minutes in.
I'll tell you what's going to be fascinating. And I'll probably repeat myself before the thing, but if he does try to make this like about like I want the country to come together, and I want to reach put an olive branch out to Nancy Pelosi, it's going to be fascinating to see. And his approval rating will move on that. But it is going to be a function of just how deluded and absent the American public is to see how far up it moves.
And that's another segment of Blaming the Electorate.
I got another one of those segments coming right up. All I'm doing now is just I'm writing the book in my head.
Tonight, analysts say it might move the needle, and they could be right, but that's because you never bet against the stupidity, lack of informedness, and general ignorance of the American people.
That is not it. It is far more active. It's not ignorant. I'm sorry.
They're robustly stupid.
It's just the desperate desire to have things to be living in a delusion.
Right.
And that because honestly, like you have to be. I can understand why people support him because there are hateful racist types out there who feel they're under siege. What I don't understand is that he was pretty nice in that speech. I changed my opinion about that guy. That to me just seems nuts. All right, folks.
That is actually pretty nuts.
It's pretty nuts. We're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. And when we do, we don't have a post roll. No
post rolls. You nailed them.
And here is what's going to happen. We're going to be live streaming tonight, 8:30 p.m. We will have a show tomorrow. It will be an interview that I think that we have pre-recorded, so we will have a new show for you tomorrow. But we're going to come in late. And just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off. Always free shipping. And tonight is Tuesday night. There is no Michael Brooks show, but it will be Thursday or last Thursday, depending on your preference.
It'll be on this Thursday's special Michael Brooks show. Jeffrey Halper, who's the head of Israelis Against Housing Demolition, is going to join us and talk about one state democracy, home demolition, anti-home demolition activism. Then Brianna Joy Gray of The Intercept is going to talk about Kamala Harris's prosecutorial record, her political history, and we'll dissect the State of the Union illicit history this weekend with Zach Carter of the 1990s, why Howard Schultz's whole campaign is a giant sort of exercise in desperation to reverse the clock among America's elites back to the 1990s. We'll explain what that means. Good couple with the Third Way illicit history. Patreon.com/TMBS. Also, of course, on YouTube and iTunes.
Jamie, the Antifada.
Yeah, so this week on All in the Antifada Family, we are joined by some longtime listeners who've been with us since the beginning to discuss the nefarious role of Vladimir Putin in undermining not just American democracy, but everyday freedoms in all of our lives in the greatest nation on earth. We also have a group sing-along, and it was very cool to have all of our excellent listeners right here with us, IRL. So check it out, patreon.com/theantifada. I also want to give a little shout out to Comrade Ted Leo for inviting us, North Brooklyn DSA, to have a table at his show this past weekend. It was a lot of fun.
Sweet. He's the one who provided us with our daily opening version of Pressure Drop.
Ted Leo's awesome. He's the real deal, both in terms of obviously he's a good musician, but very committed to this stuff. He's a really good person.
Yeah, he said very nice things about us too on the stage. It made us feel great. And we got like 10 signups, so
sweet.
It was a good night.
The most recent literary hangover, I didn't really remember this, but it's actually kind of topical with the Northam minstrel blackface stuff, because we go into the early history of that. Sort of in the 1830s, that was one of the original sort of mass cultures. And we go into that a little bit, so check it out, folks.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920 is the number. Be right back. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird.
unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Wow. But Sam, I gotta get off. No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me, hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, the famous fun half. This Charles Payne, let's play this other Charles Payne thing. He's wrong about this, incidentally. But it's so obvious. Here he goes. Yeah, this is the other one. This is clip number 3. They're really up in arms about this whole... Oh, that was that? Oh, okay. Oh, we guess we didn't go...
I can look for another one.
Oh, all right. Oh, we do. I thought did we end that early? Okay, that's okay. We don't need to do that. It's not just Fox that is completely obsessed with AOC, the tax proposal. I mean, it really is amazing how worried I are about this. Now, is it from that same clip?
Yeah, it's from the same thing where the guy heckled him.
The other day?
Yeah, like last week.
Wait. Okay, I guess people couldn't get over the heckling first, and now
there's actually more substance to it.
Back to that Howard Schultz clip with Andrew Ross Sorkin. He's a little bit concerned that the way that we're referring to the word billionaire. Let's listen to this. And so, look, everybody, we don't want to get too PC around here, but we do need to be careful about how we speak about people who have an enormous amount of money. We don't want to, in any way make them feel marginalized.
I am probably the, strong contender for least PC person in this office, but I have to admit I was moved by this sort of genuine human sentiment here.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one final question about the system and the capitalistic system of money and what it may or may not be doing to politics. And then I want to get into your story and being in the projects and where you came from, because I think there's some instructive and important items to talk about. But the author of Winner Takes All sent in a question and said, do you agree that billionaires have too much power in American public life? And it gets at the issue that AOC has been talking about. It gets at the issue that Elizabeth Warren's been talking about. It gets at...
Yeah, the moniker billionaire now has become the catchphrase. I would rephrase that, and I would say that people of means have been able to leverage their wealth and their interest in ways that are unfair. And I think that speaks to the inequality. But it also directly speaks to the special interests that are paid for by people of wealth and corporations who are looking for influence. And they have such unbelievable influence on the politicians who are steeped in the ideology of both parties. And once again, I go back to this. If I should run for president, I am not in bed with any party. I am not in bed with any special interest. All I'm trying to do is one thing: walk in the shoes of the American people.
You're going to need to scuff your shoes
up. That is
up.
really something. I'd change that moniker to just a means, a person of means.
First of all, just to be clear, Andrew, that term billionaires is actually violence. So if we could respect the tone a little bit first.
Don't dehumanize.
Yeah, don't judge.
You dehumanize me with violent rhetoric. So that being said, I think that both sides. Don't raise my taxes.
But he actually was talking about 3 sides, of which he is none. He's saying that, well, other billionaires, other people of means, will leverage that money to buy the two different parties. And I am not I'm not like
Some
any of them.
billionaires do things like throw a tantrum if the city of Seattle doesn't give them a massive tax
Do you know how
giveaway
close-
and then ruin the Seattle Supersonics. That's what some people of means might do.
Do you know how close he is to saying, like, look back behind you? Do you see only one set of tracks? That's because I was carrying the American people on my shoulders.
Yeah, don't judge a billionaire until you've walked a mile in his Louboutins, okay?
Yeah, did you
Exactly.
see your footprints on the sand? Did you know a billionaire owned that beach?
Yeah.
God.
Ari,
Wait, what's this other
Andrew,
clip?
I'd like
Does
to
he have
share
another
an
clip?
ancient billionaire proverb
Is
with
he
you.
This is a longer one on AOC and how she's sort of just misinformed, and we need to,
Okay, and does this come after that in the
It was
timeline?
actually immediately before it.
Oh, immediately before it. Okay, so he hasn't quite introduced the notion of not using the word billionaire. Okay.
Let me ask you a question that might be put under the umbrella about the American dream, because in many ways you are the embodiment of it. However, this is AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You know her, I imagine. I don't know if you know her personly.
I do not. She was born in Queens, I think, right? Or
She not Brooklyn. Her advisor says that every billionaire, and you are one of them, is a policy failure, meaning that the capitalistic society that we live in today is improperly structured, and that actually your success and becoming a billionaire is a failure of the system. What do you think of that?
It's so un-American to think that way. First off, I'm self-made. As you said, I came from the projects and took advantage of the promise of the country. I'm living proof of the American dream and the aspiration, the magnetism, and the opportunities that were presented to me. I think there is a problem that she has identified, but I think the way she's going about it, unfortunately, she's a bit misinformed. The problem is we have significant inequality in the country. The problem is we have about 40% of American families that literally don't have $400 for a crisis. We have roughly 5 million young people, many African American, Latino, that are not in school, not in work, and 1 out of every 6 Americans are food insecure every night. So she's identified issues that have to be fixed, but not to do it in a way that's punitive to people who have succeeded because of the foundation and the gift and the promise of the country. So when President Trump issued a new tax policy that took the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21%, I was with you on television that day and said, I thought this was a terrible mistake, that it was fool's gold, that to reward corporations and not look at it as an opportunity for comprehensive tax reform and give the people who need it the most relief was a tremendous missed opportunity. In addition to that, there's a great opportunity for infrastructure development in America that could create jobs.
Okay, I don't need to hear more from this guy. You know what's stunning is he talks about AOC as being misinformed. This guy just laid out the case for why billionaires are a policy failure. Okay, there are 2 points here. He says the problem is inequality. Well, the fact of the matter is that your billions of dollars should be spread around, and that's the only thing that is going to minimize inequality. There is no amount of money that you can give these people who can't save $400 that is going to minimize inequality if you are allowed to continue to make money at the rate in which you've been making it and to even hold on the money that you have. That's just a physical impossibility, and that's his facts. That's his set of facts.
Well, and to make
and
it
wait a second. And on top of that, giving tax breaks to people who cannot save $400 is meaningless. Those people do not make enough where a reduction in their taxes would make an iota of a difference. This is absurd. This guy is like within one answer. And we don't continue on to see if Andrew Ross Sorkin calls him out on it. But in one answer, he both says, my critics don't know what they're talking about, and now let me prove that I don't know what I'm talking about. We agree on the same set of facts, and I'm going to prove in the course of this answer that I don't know what I'm talking about.
And let me add a third point that is very minor compared to those two, which you just outlined. But like, if the brand is we're bringing the country together, and essentially like my policies are right wing on economics, and then I'll throw a bunch of sops to some kind of like, attempt to sort of like reignite the Obama idea of uniting the country, which is the closest I could see to like a thread here coming through Schmidt and Burton advising him and his own delusions. It is an incredible tick he has that essentially every single time AOC's name comes up, or Bernie, or anybody that talks, or Warren, he always his first move is literally, they're un-American.
Right.
And the incredible synthesis of we need to stop demonizing each other, we need to listen, we need to figure this out. Oh, what do you think of a tax proposal to solve the problems you just acknowledged are real, like Sam said? Oh, that's un-American.
Yeah.
And then you compound that AOC pointed out of like, why the hell did nobody ever say to him, why don't you start with a race for city council? Which goes to the Steve Jobs example I always use in the Walter Isaacson book of him asking Jobs about education policy. I mean, he's like, has anybody ever asked the New Jersey State Public School Teacher of the Year about Apple supply chains? Does anybody ask, like, just the incredible deference given to these people is wrong in and of itself. And then they go out and prove themselves to be both wrong on the merits and then totally internally contradictory in actually a really messed up way.
Yeah.
Because we don't, I'm just like, we don't use that term. We are ironic when we say like un-American or whatever. He's being sincere.
Yeah.
And he calls it that every single time her name comes up.
Yep. He also refuses to make the connection between the existence of billionaires on the one hand and the existence of lots and lots of people at the bottom whose exploitation enables the existence of billionaires, right? Like America cannot support an infinite number of billionaires, right? Like if everybody did what they were supposed to do according to him and like lived the American dream, the economy would crash. So he's being very disingenuous there.
Or it would just cost like, $1.2 million for a latte.
Everyone would be a billionaire, so no one would be.
He's actually not terribly far off from the Sacha Baron Cohen character, Billy Wayne, who goes
Why don't we just put the
99%? Yeah, we just moved the decimal over,
1%.
and then the 99% is in the 1%. That's actually like Howard Schultz is just doing a bougie version of that bit.
All right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot happening right now in terms of the attempts to forestall Medicare for All. And we have seen just about every candidate in the race to this point, to the extent that they're supportive of Medicare for All, all back off and provide some wiggle room. We have seen a lot of commentators, ostensibly on the left. I mean, I got criticized by somebody on Twitter for talking about that John Favreau clip from
Favreau or the other one?
Love it. From Pod Save America. And somebody criticized me like, did you listen to the whole podcast? And I'm like, no, I listened to the part that they cut and put on there, that they cherry picked because they were trying to make a point, and I was refuting that point, which is that there is an ideological difference. And there's even more importantly than an ideological difference, because I personally feel that you can very easily get too caught up in ideology, but there is a fundamental difference between how we do Medicare for All, or the idea of Medicare for All and simply providing universal coverage. Universal coverage is certainly one of the reasons why you would want Medicare for All. That's the point. But the other idea is that you want to take it off the table. You don't want it to be so Byzantine. You don't want it to be a function of your employment. You want to reduce the cost of Medicare for All. And the fact is that we know you cannot reduce the cost of health insurance if the vast majority of people are on private insurance. It's simply not possible unless you're willing to impose strict cost controls across the board by the government. Now, if you want to raise that, if you want to say we're going to apply strict, mandatory, statutory, federal cost controls, an endoscopy can only cost so much. This type of surgery can only cost so much. I mean, Medicare will do that for all. Will do that in terms of reimbursement rates. It will create downward pressure. But the only other way to achieve that, if you're going to have disparate payers of healthcare, is to impose strict statutory federal cost controls. And then you're having to create a whole new bureaucracy that is redundant and then frankly is going to squeeze. It's going to have to squeeze the insurance companies anyways.
Yeah, and you leave an industry alive that wants to get rid of the cost controls. It's like the frog and the scorpion. That's
also true. You're going to, I mean, I don't think politically it's doable, but in terms of just like, there's only, if your agenda is to cut the cost of healthcare and give it universal, there is really no other way to do it. I think you can maintain a smaller private insurance, like I say, supplementary, but you can't have them provide health insurance for everyone. It's just not going. It's just physically not going to work.
The UK has had Bupa for a long time, but nobody really. I mean, it's just for rich people, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it makes it more palatable for Howard Schultz to have Medicare for all, and he still has his private doctor. And is paying his private doctor with his private health insurance, then God bless. We'll get to Howard Schultz's billions a slightly different way. In the meantime, this has come up. The Intercept reports apparently someone's leaking this. So not everybody on Team Pelosi is excited with this initiative, but it appears that the Democrats are going to focus on drug prices, and which is all well and good. They should. There's some easier ways to do that than I think what they're proposing, but broadly speaking, the leadership of the Democratic Party wants to focus on drug prices. And part of what they're doing is they're going out to health insurance industry and basically saying, we will leave you alone if you help us with drug prices. That's the deal that's going on. In other words, they are already negotiating away the thing that got them, not totally, but certainly many new congressional members were elected on. This is part of a PowerPoint presentation that was brought in there and that was shown, I guess, to insurance executives by this guy, Wendell Primus. He is a top aide to Nancy Pelosi. Let's play the video because he talks about there are apparently like 5 things here. Wait, let me just go back to that. There are 5 things that single payer is difficult. They're trying to say we need to fix the ACA. And improving the ACA is the most cost-effective path to universal coverage. They argue it's slowed growth and improved quality. That's probably true. The growth has slowed, but I got news for you. It's very hard to pay your insurance bill, which has gone up 15, 20% over the number of years, and be comforted by the fact that it's not gone up 16 to 21%. That's slowed the growth of, that's not enough. And there's absolutely, no future guarantees. It has, they're going to undo the sabotage and expand ACA, the Affordability of Health Insurance Act of 2018. They're all, again, just laying Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids. The problems with the single payer, cost, which we will address when this guy talks about in his video, creates winners and losers. I don't know what the F that means. There
are no winners and losers in our current system.
Let me put it this way. There is no such thing that can pass There's nothing the government can do that doesn't create winners and losers. That is what society is always about. There is no win, 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 win repeated over 300 million times. That doesn't happen. The question is, who are the winners? Who are the losers? Stakeholders are against. Yes, that is without a doubt. There are stakeholders who are against. There are also some stakeholders who are for. That is all like the vast majority of the American people. Monies are needed for other priorities. That gets to the question of cost. And frankly, those priorities, to make sure that everyone is getting health care are pretty substantial priorities. It's going to free up a lot of money in the economy, just in terms of the sheer productivity of people not having to spend all the time, trying to fill out insurance forms. And implementation challenges, yes, of course. All right, so let's listen to this guy say it a little bit.
The other thing I want to say about universal coverage, improving upon the ACA is clearly the most cost-effective way or budget-effective way of getting to universal coverage. Single payer is very expensive. The Urban Institute says $30 trillion. It creates winners and losers. I mean, you're taking basically everybody that's getting...
Pause it. We know about this $30 trillion figure. It is more or less the same figure that the Mercatus Foundation, we're already paying half of that amount anyways. Okay, so the other half of that amount is going to be a savings in people's pocket. But now he is talking from a sheerly political standpoint. If we offload the expenses to people after they pay for their, as if it was groceries, right? Then the government is not accused of spending too much money. Even though the individual has a greater financial burden than they would if the government was spending the money, they can't be blamed.
Continue. $1 billion. It creates winners and losers. I mean, you're taking basically everybody that's getting employer-provided benefits and putting them onto the federal budget. Now, again, in that process, you're going to create winners and losers. Some of the retail stores that don't offer very good benefits are going to be benefited. Some others that get very wonderful coverage through their employers are at risk of losing some of them.
Pause it. So in other words, right now there are winners and losers. Those of you who are working at a retail store, you're a loser. Those of you who are in the C-suite, you're a winner. And that could change. And that would be bad.
Of that. And so the point here is I do not understand why all the excitement in California is kind of ground zero for some of that excitement about universal coverage. The leader is very aware of the cost of that. It has no chance of happening in the next several years, et cetera. And
so the leader being Nancy Pelosi is aware of the cost of that. I don't know what that means, and that it has no chance of happening in the next several years. I think that's also true because the Republicans are not going to sign on to it. But you know what else is also true? Fixing the ACA is also several years away.
Years, et cetera. And I would say, the Medicare for All, Medicare right now doesn't have an out-of-pocket limit. It would not be eligible for going on to the exchange. So where I think the debate has to go is improving Medicare and Medicaid. Democrats don't have a very good answer right now, in my opinion, to block granting Medicaid. I think we've got to be thinking about taking some of the long-term care cost off of Medicaid and putting it onto Medicare or financing it directly. We've got to talk about slowing healthcare cost growth, and we need to build the case for revenues to make Medicare and Social Security solvent and to finance long-term.
So, okay. all the stuff he's talking about in terms of improving Medicare and Medicaid are good things, but they're the same challenges that we have for Medicare for all. Need to build the case for revenues to make Medicare and Social Security solvent finance long-term care is the same argument as it's going to cost more and we're going to have to argue to get more money. All of the transferring some Medicaid long-term costs to Medicare, these are all things that could be much simpler under a Medicare for all program. And again, if you want to get back to that winners and losers situation and you're worried about upsetting those billionaires, I'd say let them have their boutique health insurance.
And guess what? They're still winners.
Exactly.
Like the boss class still gets to sit on their asses while their employees and their pre-existing capital do all the work and make all the value. So whatever.
You should be saying you won't have such huge winners. It makes less
You'll be
huge
winning a little less.
So, I mean, some of the stuff that he's arguing here in the argument that some of the Medicare programs would not qualify under the exchanges in terms of, and I guess that may mean in terms of like of specific benefits. But if you're going to raise the quality of the benefits under Medicare, you're going to run into the exact same problem that you're going to have with, Medicare for all, except for Medicare for all from a political standpoint. There's a reason why there's so much excitement, because it is a much easier political sell than we want to ensure that the COLA increases of Social Security are not eaten up by increases of out-of-pocket expenses in Medicare. No, just go out Medicare for all. We're going to make it all good.
No. You just stood Ezra Klein's bow tie on ends right there.
Even just like having to listen to that just now made my eyes glaze over when the good option is so much simpler. And it's not always, it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes the good option is more complicated and that's hard, but this is great because it's not. And one more point I want to make that I got from Nathan Robinson wrote a really good article actually in reference to criminal justice reform, but this is a concept that can be applied across the board. Just because it quote unquote works and produces the desired outcome doesn't necessarily mean it's good, right? So like you could make a law that everybody in the country has to buy private insurance, no subsidies, no anything. And if they don't do it, they go to jail. Right. And a lot more people would have coverage that way. But would that be good? Would people's quality of life improve? I don't think so.
Exactly. I mean, I think the idea is that, like I said yesterday, where people are done with the idea of striving for universal coverage by hook or crook. That's going to be, people want their health insurance to not be a thing that they have to constantly worry about and deal with.
I was looking up, forget where I came across this, but who was the guy? He ran for Senate in 93 or was it 91? Harris Wofford, I think. He ran for, basically he was the guy, his Senate race was in a lot of ways the template for Bill Clinton's 92 race. But what was funny was the centerpiece of it was, I don't think it was single payer, but it was universal health care. Some version of pretty, by that standards of that time, very aggressive. And apparently he put out an ad and that reversed a 40-point deficit. He ended up winning a race down from 40 points. And it was like our forefathers correctly gave everybody the right to a legal process because they understood that everybody needed that because they were a bunch of lawyers and people attuned to that. And the guy was like, I'm a doctor. And if the founders were doctors, everybody would have health care.
Right.
So exactly the same thing as far as any type of basic starting point in this system.
It needs to be simple. Keep it simple.
Exactly. It needs to be simple. Wonder how that guy's health's doing.
Tim
Speaking
from
of
Boston
healthcare.
on the IM. Song plays, somebody's getting married from the Muppets Take Manhattan. I've never witnessed an interview that hit Sam's back wall so hard. I'd just like to point out that this guest is definitely Sam's next wife. Jonathan Armstead.
That was a great interview. Can we talk about the sponsors?
Jonathan Armstead. Sam, you've done a great job of listening to callers talk about their petty qualms of the Democratic candidates who have announced so far. Can you explain to me if I'm wrong in the following hang-up? Should I be skeptical of Elizabeth Warren because she used to be a Republican? I sometimes worry it could mean she could be easily duped. I don't think so. What her party affiliation was 20 some odd years ago is that relevant. JJ Cool. Hey, Sam, should we be looking forward to seeing you upstaging Bernie, upstaging Abrams with your own State of the Union rebuttal? Adam Cokehead. I got fin-domed by the Antifada, and it was awesome.
Hell yeah.
Charles Crowdhammer's wheelchair's cushion. Did you see Hannity blame sex trafficking on liberals last night? It was amazing. Watch and discuss. We got to pull that.
That sounds
Wait,
interesting.
what was that?
I
What
don't
was
know.
it? Sex trafficking? What?
He blamed liberals for sex trafficking.
Well,
Trump?
Liberals did support Sesta Fosta.
That's
in
exactly
addition
what
to
Hannity was talking
conservatives,
about.
and that has increased sex
Hannity
trafficking.
was like, Sesta Fosta? More like abusive sex workers. All right, that is right there. Maybe that's it. Progressive Hannity.
Miff
Pretty basic and
Schechter.
obvious.
Miff Schechter, sup homies, this week and and we're keeping the dog too. My co-host Jan Paparochis and I on healthcare policy expert Ness lookalike John Lovett. We discussed the big issues like why Obamacare is already Medicare for all because people eventually all get Medicare. And can we call their media consultant to give us tips on coming up with podcast names? Helen of Tyranny, Trump walked back troop withdrawal from Iraq on Sunday's Face the Nation should make everybody wary. Is citing Iran as the reason and saying,
Yes.
all I want to do is be able to watch. This is how it starts. Just ask Jared about how much he regrets not being more prudent when Trump first told him that all he wanted to do was watch.
I was about to say that's a really good point. And I'll be covering that a lot more on MR and on TMBS.
Yeah, do we have
but
that clip or did we get rid of
you
that
took
clip?
it in a better direction.
The clip from, we had that yesterday, right? The Iraq one?
Of the guys? The
No,
vets?
of Trump on Sunday. This is Donald Trump arguing that he is completely for withdrawal except for when it actually happens.
In Iraq, it was a big mistake to go. One of the greatest mistakes going into the Middle East that our country has ever made. One of the greatest mistakes that we've ever made.
But you want to keep
when
troops
it was
there now.
chosen, well, we spent a fortune on building this incredible base. We might as well keep it. And one of the reasons I want to keep it is because I want to be looking a little bit at Iran, because Iran is a real problem.
Whoa, that's news. You're keeping troops in Iraq because you want to be able to strike in Iran?
No, because I want to be able to watch Iran. All I want to do is be able to watch. We have an unbelievable and expensive military base built in Iraq. It's perfectly situated for looking at all over different parts of the troubled Middle East. Rather than pulling up, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, we're going to keep watching and we're going to keep seeing. And if there's trouble, if somebody's looking to do nuclear weapons or other things, we're going to know it before they do.
So you're going to trust the intelligence that you receive?
I am going to trust the intelligence that I'm putting there. But I will say this, my intelligence people, if they said, in fact, that Iran is a wonderful kindergarten, I disagree with them 100%. It is a vicious country that kills many people. When you talk about torture and so many other things.
All right, pause it. So let me get this straight. One, if anybody was curious, we have a huge surveillance system out of our base in Iraq. So just in case you were wondering, what is the focal point of our surveillance of Iran? It is that base. Now, maybe they already knew this. Maybe they didn't.
No, but also Qatar, too.
Right, we can't.
Let me just clear that up in all the interviews.
I mean, he clearly just got briefed on the surveillance capacity that is coming out that is unique to our embassy in Iraq, right? Like, he just got briefed on that, and he just basically told the world. A. B, he's also just said, despite the fact that we have intelligence there, I'm not going to listen to them unless they tell me what I believe is true.
Exactly.
And C, he thinks that kindergartens are super benign.
And Maybe they'll come back. The country is getting absolutely. When I ended the horrible Iran nuclear deal, it was a horrible deal done by President Obama and John Kerry that didn't know what the hell he was doing. When I ended that deal, Margaret, all of a sudden, Iran became a different country. They became very rapidly. Right now, they're a country that's in big financial trouble. Let's see what happens.
I want to move on here, but I should say your intel chiefs do say Iran's abiding by that nuclear deal. I know you think it's a bad deal.
I disagree with them. By the way,
you disagree with that
I have
assessment.
intel people. That doesn't mean I have to agree.
What?
So I just think, like, whatever. It's Trump and it doesn't matter. And frankly, this is an area where there would be no difference. Marco Rubio would have done exactly the same thing in terms of ruining this and getting us closer to the war. And this is the, establishment position of the Republican Party and of the Israeli and Saudi and Gulf lobbies that sort of push against it. But, I mean, there is a very logical case just in terms of narrow self-interest as to why Iran would want to have a weapons capacity, just purely based on the fact that they're surrounded by a ring of U.S. troop presence in Afghanistan and Iraq, the fact that Israel has that capacity and threatens Iran, and the amount of work that they actually did effectively, not just Obama and Kerry, but actually Wendy Sherman, who was like the point person on that, to assure them that there's another way to do this, was actually like, it's the most successful piece of modern diplomacy that any of us have ever seen and lived through.
I don't believe that.
Right, exactly. I don't believe that.
From my own measured experience in foreign policy negotiations, no.
But on the other hand, I hosed Gaddafi on a tent once.
I got news for you.
So think about it.
They're not kindergartners.
They're not kindergartners. And also, I actually think it's really healthy for the world system, but the fact that the Eurozone has actually created like an alternative backup finance mechanism so that they can keep the agreement going with Iran. If you're like in some, a nationalist American prestige mode, very bad.
Oh, yeah.
For American,
right.
Like the way that overlaps with the way the Europeans have been getting involved with the Belt and Road Initiative, the way the fact that the Chinese and the Indians are already totally, and the Russians are 100% on board with this. Iran's making inroads in Africa. Like, this is, even by that really narrow, like, of course I support it because I'm into peace and blah, 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 but it's a disaster for U.S. influence.
This is the nightmare for all those people who want a U.S. hegemony, right? Which is like, we're the only system of finance in the world. Bad wagon. Just wondering if you guys made the conscious decision not to back or mention Jumaane Williams for public advocate. Seems like he's been pretty earnestly working for the people, for the city for years. He's taken New York Communities for Change real estate pledge. No money from real estate PACs. No money from principals of for-profit developers. No money from landlords owning buildings with 6 more units. No money from corporate PACs. Just wondering if you took a look and decided to go with no Mickey. Is there something that you know that we should know about Jumaane that disqualifies him in the MR team? So, no. I mean, from my perspective, I don't want to speak for Michael. That real estate pledge is all well and good. The definition of for-profit developers is pretty loosey-goosey. One of the keys is to set up these nonprofit entities to build the development, sell it, et cetera, et cetera. But putting that aside, the reason why, and for probably any other position in the city or in the state, I would be supportive of Williams. But from my perspective, this is the public advocate is a rather undefined job that I think is best suited for someone who does not anticipate or has reason to not be able to anticipate a long-term political future in New York state politics. The way that New York state politics work, it is so transactional that and in any other position, I think you need that. But I just happen to think that sort of in terms of personality-wise, and in terms of her role in the context of the Democratic Commission on looking at primary reform, someone who is both willing to function within the Democratic Party, but also willing to burn a lot of bridges. And so I think she's uniquely suited for this job. I don't think that there's anything. I don't think there's any place that she's not going to go to in the context of this job, in terms of exposing stuff that's going on in either the state or the municipal government. The state is sort of a bank shot, but and so that's why.
I also, I basically would echo that. I also think her work on Puerto Rico in the context of New York City is exceptional and really important. And let's just be blunt. Like I know Nomiki and I don't know Jumaane, right? And just think that there's some transparency and just like,
of course,
if you know somebody and you trust them and you like them, then that doesn't mean you dislike or denigrate somebody else at all. And really the only substantive, I like Jumaane a lot. I was very enthusiastic to vote for him and Cynthia Nixon. It does to me seem like specifically the only thing I've seen that's negative, that could be on the negative side of the ledger, is I am pretty wary of how he's kind of played those real estate donations. And to me, it seems like that's something you need to be absolutely unequivocal on, especially in a place like New York City where so many people, any politician in New York City is most of them are going to, Trump is disgusting. They might even have some really excellent and correct rhetoric on inequality, on race and policing. But there's a couple of real basic tests, and one of them would be not taking real estate money.
For me, it's just the biggest thing for me is just like, I want someone in this position who owes no favors, is reliant on no one else in the party for their future in that respect. I just that's basically it. And so all of the lack of experience, the lack of experience in the context of the Democratic Party is actually, this is one of the few positions I think that is a plus, frankly.
Speaking as a member of the New York City DSA, going back to when he was, running with Cynthia Nixon, he pledged right before our vote, not to take any more real estate money. And since then, there have been some questions as to whether he's wavering on that pledge. But even like that, and there's also issues with maybe violations of campaign finance rules. But even aside from all that, like if I have the choice between somebody for public advocate who used to take real estate money and then stopped after people put pressure on them, and someone who never took real estate money, I'm going to go with the second.
JB, does every POTUS approval rating go up after the State of the Union? Maybe Trump will be the first to have his drop. I have a feeling it's going to go up. I just don't see how it cannot. Glass-Steagall, two of the John Saves America guys run a consulting firm called Fenway Strategies. Strangely, this never comes up on the show, where they interview and endorse candidates and policies. Who are their clients? For the sake of balance, Sam, I also think you should disclose this info for Do You See Communications. USA, and that's actually a good name.
I was noticing the other day, I was listening to some Biggie, and unfortunately I wasn't here for your lyrical breakdown of Juicy.
Well, I wasn't breaking it down.
Your need. By the way, which site did you use to read lyrics on? You didn't go to Genius, did you?
No, I'm not familiar with Genius.
Good. Okay, I like it. But I think it's in Hypnotized. It's Biggie. Is it? I don't forget. I think she's saying.
Why don't you just tell it to Ari Melber?
Yeah.
USA and the
Ari Melber.
Yeah, he puts
thinks
you to shame.
He's me.
He puts you to shame.
Oh, I think you'll find that's the other way around.
Ari Melber gets the Bodega Boys shout-outs.
Melber brings us.
He doesn't back.
I gotta say,
knife in the Mac.
I never know what he's talking. I never know what he's talking about. But it's not like that stuff. I can see what's in the prompter. He pulls that out of nowhere.
Really?
Good for Melber. He doesn't write that stuff.
Good for Melber.
I mean,
There's a reason he was the
Just
victim of a
respect.
cuck joke
Respect.
at the TMBS live show.
Respect.
Melber
That's all
off
I'm
the
saying.
dome.
Melber.
USA and the UK. Just FYI, John Avalon was quoting Van, who said last year, tonight Donald Trump became president tonight. It's a running joke now on CNN. Oh. Was he mocking Van Jones?
Is CNN that self-aware?
I feel like that's giving John Avalon way too
Wow.
much credit.
That would have been pretty good, though. Apathetic steamroller. I think one thing that I think isn't talked about enough is homelessness. According to HUD in 2012, homelessness in America could be effectively eradicated for only $20 billion per year. That's less than 0.5% of the federal budget. Pajama Boy. Hey, Sam, so New Jersey just passed a $15 minimum wage, which is great. I have to admit, I'm not the best economist, but I keep hearing people say, oh, this will put small businesses out of business, or this will bring automation on quicker, or your fast food prices are going to skyrocket. What's the best way to combat this line of thinking? You just Google Seattle, $15 minimum wage, and just the proof is in the pudding. It hasn't. None of the dire consequences that were supposedly going to happen in Seattle happened. Now, there could be other factors that implicate this, the overall economy, broadly speaking, but there's a lot of reason to believe that all of these small businesses are going to do slightly better because their clientele are going to have more money. And when you give $15, when you give a raise to someone who is making minimum wage, I can tell you with almost 100% assuredness what they're going to do with that raise. They're going to spend it. And they're going to spend it locally. Because you're still not making enough to say like, oh, I'm going to put away 25% of my income, 10% of my income, and put it into the stock market. Or I'm going to, buy that second house and I'm going to pour my money into, Western New Jersey or whatever it is.
Amy Klobuchar hot take. More people with minimum wage.
That's his Gordon Gekko clip. You remember this?
What is
This is from a while ago, but they basically asked him about Bernie. I think it was maybe in 2016.
Who's this?
This is the guy that Gordon Gekko was based on, and they asked him about Bernie's policies. Here, I'll play it.
I'm curious, we're asking everybody essentially who you think the best candidate for the economy would be.
Bernie Sanders.
Without a doubt. Why is that?
No question.
Policies?
Well, I think it's quite simple again. If you look at something called velocity of money, you guys know what that is, I presume. That means how much gets spent and turns around. When you have the top 1% getting money, they spend 5-10% of what they earn. When you have the lower end of the economy getting money, they spend 100 or 110% of what they earn. As you've had a transfer of wealth to the top and a transfer of income to the top, you have a shrinking consumer base, basically, and you have a shrinking velocity of money. Bernie is the only person out there who I think is talking at all about both fiscal stimulation and banking rules that will get the banks to begin to generate lending again as opposed to speculation.
Wow.
Boom.
And then all of them pretended that conversation never, ever happened. That's what happened.
Did you ever meet Michael Douglas?
Honestly, that is like after that moment is over, they all walk to the commissary. They all take out a knife. They cut their hands right like this, and they do a blood oath to never talk about that again. We're going to pretend that never happened. Are you all in? Because we all got to do this. Because if one of us breaks, we're all going down. That's what happens after that.
Hope nobody saw that.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's, there's a lot of different ways of talking about it. That was probably the most succinct and concise version I've heard. We had Nick Hanauer on the program years ago who said, even a rich man eats one loaf of bread at a time. The bottom line is you give money to people on the low end of the income spectrum, and they will spend it. It will generate more economic activity than if you give it to a billionaire because they don't even know how to spend their money.
I thought living in excess was the American dream.
They go to
I
space,
guess.
okay?
What?
They're trying to go to Mars.
But the thing is, they're not. They're just talking about it.
We will go to Mars one day, you idiot.
No, they want it to accumulate. Their money makes more money for them. That's what they use it for.
It just makes them feel good.
Shut up, Sam.
Maybe build like a bunker for when the revolution comes.
That's what I'd be doing.
That is actually what they're doing.
They've
Never
already
read
done that, but
Yeah,
there's only
that's
so
true,
many
too.
bunkers you can build.
You know, it'd be real sad if the Majority Report studio, if, I don't know, does the word gawker mean anything
I
to
was
you
going to say
with your gross
I
little
would
show?
say that the odds of this program ending because of that type of thing, as opposed to just like me passing away or just like retiring.
Oh, that can also be arranged. Maybe there's a little accident while you're checking your stupid Twitter.
Here we go. That's the way this is all going to go down. Calling from a 478 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Yes, this is supporting character Jeff from Georgia, reporter for duty, sir.
Jeff from Georgia. How are you, sir? Are you still feeling the after effects of your New York adventure?
Yeah, man, I'm just down here, missing the New York subway real bad, and for anyone who thinks I'm being sarcastic about that, I surely am not. It was a wonder of modern technological advancement, and I fucking loved it. It was awesome. I know it's got its problems, but it ain't nothing like it anywhere else I've ever been. And
Should have been here
that's
5
damn
years ago.
true, man.
Yeah, I love to complain about the subway as all New Yorkers do, and then I go anywhere else and I'm like, oh.
And I'm like, I'm in LA in a frigging Mercedes lift. This is awesome.
Well, we're not all pulling down that sweet podcast money like everyone here, I know. So not everyone can live the luxurious life that we do as superstars on the mid-tier talk show circuit. Actually, man, I wanted to talk a little bit about healthcare. I know it's kind of going wrong these days. The clip that you played aside, that's kind of one side of the angle for people who are against the single-payer system. I think the other side that we got to watch out for, this frankly is what I'm more concerned about, is what is kind of hedging, right? Like, Medicare for all, that sounds good, but maybe not, or maybe we get a buy-in, or maybe a public option, or whatever, just kind of fiddling around the edges a little bit. And what they're relying on, and they say it all the time, is, a lot of people like their insurance, and they want to keep it, right? And I want to meet people where they're at. So, I know I'm spitting into the wind here a little bit, but two pieces of advice for the left, I think, is one, your insurance ain't your doctor. I think a lot of people, just conflate the two of the things. And the other thing is if that good health insurance you got, you like it a lot, your employer provides it, I got bad news for you. It ain't safe. You can't keep it if you want it. Insurance companies downgrade their insurance plans. Companies, downgrade their employer-provided insurance plans all the time. I've had 5-6 insurance cards since my wife started working at her job. Every year there's a damn new one, right? Like, if you like your insurance, you're not safe.
Well,
it'd be much harder to take away. Go ahead.
You could lose your job.
You bring up, in theory, the idea of a Medicare buy-in I find intriguing. The problem with it is, and you're hitting on this, is that if you have, and this is why when I talk about, it's okay to keep some measure of private insurance. The key is that your doctor, when we talk about 90 to 95% of Americans, their doctor has to sign on to take Medicare payments, right? Like, this is the key. If Medicare is just buy-in, then you will get a two-tiered system. And that is problematic because you don't want to have people change their doctor. That's the whole point. That's one of the drags of private insurance right now. And because your doctor at any time could say, I'm not taking insurance anymore. It's just not worthwhile for me to do it. And so the biggest problem with a Medicare buy-in is that problem right there, is that all of a sudden there is a chance that essentially your health care will be ghettoized on some level and you won't be able to have access to the doctor that you had before. And so you want to make sure that there's no two tiers of medical treatment. And so, or I should say, to the extent that there's going to be two tiers, you want one of those tiers small enough that it doesn't implicate a lot of people.
The other thing I would say about people who talk about shoring up Obamacare a lot is, maybe this is a bit petty of me saying, but, from my perspective, when they were pushing the ACA, the exchanges really were the thing, the point. The Medicaid expansion was tacked on relatively late in the process to save money. Everyone would think about that. It was actually easier to just give people health insurance below a certain income line than it was to throw money at them in form of a subsidy to purchase insurance in the private market. So just everybody keep that in mind. But in any case, like these exchanges were supposedly like the future, right? And not only do people hate that shit, but it didn't even work right, and it ain't working right now. And that is not what we need to do. And I don't want to let these people really run away from that. The Medicaid expansion was great, and I supported it, obviously, but these people's solutions are not what we need.
Yeah. As soon
I appreciate you taking my call, Sam.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for visiting, Jeff. Good job.
Yeah, good to see you, by the way. Now he's gone. So, as soon as other Democrats started to parrot the words Medicare for all, I knew this was going to happen. They were going to water it down, take a phrase that people like, and make it mean something totally different. Like, oh, you want Medicare for all? Here's Medicare for all plus extra access option.
Right. This is the history of this country, right? The idea of health insurance for everybody is 80 years old. And they haven't, the closest they've been able to come is the ACA, or I guess the Medicare, at least in terms of, this is not the idea that it was going to be, that simply people talking about it a lot was going to bring it about. Obviously not going to happen. It's going to be hard. Here is,
I just have to say really, sorry, just like 30 seconds. As somebody who most of my adult life and has, been around a lot of people who have, lacked health coverage for various reasons. For the obvious reasons, for significant periods of time. I just always want to reinforce the sort of basic moral calculus of this too. And the reason at least I'm so uncompromising on it. I just think it's disgusting and grotesque and actually horrifying if you've been on the experiential end of it to have this even be a question and in play. And of course, what Jamie's saying is also true of the Green New Deal and every other policy thing that has been sort of put forward by progressives and now has nice brands and good polling.
Here is a guy, Bakari Sellers, and he was the former South Carolina Democratic Party chair, if I'm not mistaken.
He was the mayor of Atlanta.
No.
Oh, okay.
And I've sat on a couple of panels with him. I've met him. He's a nice, perfectly nice guy. But there seems to be right now a big push on trying to draw down the expectations for health insurance as we enter into this campaign. And it's interesting because in 2008, this went on, but it was very quick. And part of it was that some of the biggest advocacy groups that were looking for a Medicare for all very quickly settled on, okay, we're just going to ask for the public option, which is why and that should be a cautionary tale, right? Like the negotiation ends when they start voting on the legislation. Do not pre-negotiate the best case scenario away. Not even the best case scenario. Don't pre-negotiate any scenarios away. But so understand that's what we're in the midst of now. Like it has already the fight for what the Democrats will do in 2021 has already begun. Here is Bakari Sellers with his argument.
Is throughout this process, Democrats and their plans and their ideas and all of these proposals are going to be fleshed out and people are going to get to the root of it. But what you saw this past week was you saw a slight difference of opinion because I think that Medicare for all is the standard in the Democratic Party now, but you have different ways and different candidates who want to get there. So I still favor, for example, making sure that we still have a healthy private insurance industry in this country. But I do believe that we need to move towards a Medicare for all and let private insurance fill in those gaps. And I think that you have Kamala Harris and Cory Booker who have sponsored bills throughout the whole plethora or the whole genre of that, making sure that we get and if we just drop the age limit for Medicare 5 years, I think we at least cover more people and we can at least start to have those discussions.
Now, it's such a weird frame. And this is why, I think making the idea of the existence of private insurance binary is problematic, because it is unnecessary to say that there cannot exist any private insurance for there to be a functioning and good Medicare for all.
Well, they don't outlaw private insurance in companies with single payer. They just put them largely out of business.
Well, exactly, which is exactly my point. So the point is like, rather than die on the hill of whether private insurance should exist or not, that is secondary to what the affirmative thing that we want, which is cradle to grave access to Medicare. By access, I mean free, paid for by payroll taxes. Okay? So a tax-based payment for health insurance, cradle to grave. If you want to have supplemental insurance for super wealthy people and they need that, by all means. I can have a functioning air industry that is available to everybody, and still there can be people who have their own private jets. That doesn't bother me. I mean, the root cause of their ability to have private jets is something I'm going to tackle later. Just fair warning.
We could shoot down private jets with surface-to-air missiles just for our own entertainment. Fly at your own risk, you fucking pricks.
That's the thing. It's like, don't argue that part of it. That may be a result, but that's not our worry.
Well, it seemed like he was arguing to still include the private insurers in this universal
That's
plan.
exactly right. And the opportunity
Which
to
we
do
should
that,
not do.
because see, by making it just a pure binary choice, private insurance or no private insurance, that gives the opportunity for weasel words. Well, I think private insurance has a role. Fine. But the problem is that once that becomes the argument, he's moving the goalpost to like, where private insurance actually, it's not necessarily a supplement, it's a complement. They work hand in hand. Like, no, that doesn't function. This is the thing. That's the sleight of hand here. That does not work. It does not work. If you drop the age of Medicare by 5 years, you're still going to have a big problem because you're not going to have the same access to doctors. You're going to have an increasingly number of doctors who are like, well, I'm just going to do a younger clientele on some level. And because they're not going to have the same, it's going to be an easier group of people to service. I mean, that's the problem, is that you're going to have essentially a two-tiered system, and we don't want that.
Yeah. There is no reason to include private insurance companies in the universal coverage plan besides as a handout to the private insurance companies. And then you have to look at where people's money is coming from.
Vespa, or is it Train Boy, a part of the Northam... Oh, thanks for the note, Train Boy. Found it on my chair. Part of the Northam controversy is how in medical school, future doctors are often taught to doubt physical pain reported by black patients.
Right.
Systemic racism in action.
That's
I
a
talked
very
about that
good point.
in terms of why black people were less susceptible to the opioid epidemic was two-part. One, lack of insurance, and because doctors were less willing to prescribe painkillers.
Oh, my God.
I mean, it's stunning.
Yeah,
I mean, that's,
a friend
of course,
mine,
it's not at all surprising.
A friend of mine had a totally drug-free childbirth twice, not because she was really excited to feel all the pain, but because she knew, statistically speaking, that if something went wrong, the doctors were less likely to take her seriously because she was black. So she just wanted to not ask for any drugs to begin with, so they didn't treat her like a junkie.
Vispa, I want to give you a friendly daily reminder to risk the imagination of a new kind of possibility. Or Rittelnotnikimp. Obvious acronym. Left is best. Congressional baseball fan, your favorite baseball fan will be starting a new job next week as an economist. Can I get a shofar? Oh, I don't know how to respond to that. I may not be able to IM as much, but stay tuned for my forthcoming baseball economic updates. Play ball, America. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 231 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me, Sam? This is Muhammad from California.
Hello, Mohammed. I can hear you. What's going on?
I was thinking about the healthcare for all. The MMT people think that it's going to be a deflationary event, meaning that you don't have to raise taxes, but lower them to pay for the health insurance for all, because the insurance company, which we're going to be phased out, a lot of people will be out of jobs. So you have to increase the spending to hire those people. So it's going to be have a deflationary bias. So what do you think about that?
I mean, that's conceivable. I would imagine, a lot of those people who are working now in the private insurance industry will end up working in the case of a Medicare for All, end up working for that
on the death panels.
The fact is that, look, the expense associated with private insurance is, one, obviously there's a profit motive. The profits are not received by the people who are doing the work. That may be implicated in their pay to some extent, but look, these are publicly owned companies. Then they have shareholders are getting a big chunk of it. The other savings is going to come from the efficiencies created by having a single buyer and the sort of the monopsony power that is associated with that. And you have much more rational pricing and ability to assess the efficacy of various, prescribed procedures and whatnot. So as far as it having a deflationary impact, because I'm not sure I follow that, because you're suggesting that there'll be an increase in government spending and there'll be deflationary. I'm not sure I understand how that works.
I mean, it's not about that. It's about think about it this way. For me as a company, I am getting private insurance for my employees, right?
Yeah.
I'm no longer have to do that. I'm paying.
I see what you're talking about.
So
I see what you're talking about. Yes.
The price is going down.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's one of two things that could happen in that instance, right? I mean, and it's hard to say, and it may, how you roll it out may impact it, but I mean, presumably, right? If I'm saving $10 an employee by there being a public health insurance, part of that is going to be eaten up, frankly, by new taxes levied on me as an employer, right? Because I'm going to be paying in taxes. I'm going to be paying for that. To the extent that I have any savings as a company, which I suspect I might, right? Because we know that health insurance overall is going to be is the price of health insurance to society is going to go down. We know that based on just the Libertarian think tank report. So to the extent that I am paying less in taxes than I'm actually paying for health insurance now as a company, let's say I have $2 left over, I can put a buck in my pocket and I can give $1 to my employees. And if I'm going to give $1 to my employees, I may be, enticing your employees to come work for me. And so that person's going to have to give $1 to their employee. And so that's theoretically how it would work. I don't know if it will be deflationary for an extended period of time, but
it's not going to be an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And also because a lot of administrator who was going to be let off, they're going to be competing on already jobs, so there's going to be a downward effect on prices for salaries.
Well, like I say, there might be.
It's not going to be. Yeah.
There might be.
Yeah.
Well, think about it
But,
this way.
yeah,
when unions negotiate salaries for their employees, healthcare is something that they won't have to bargain with anymore. And I know, not everyone is in a union, but I hopefully we'll see an upward trend in that in the coming years if we're all going to survive.
But there's no reason for it to be deflationary in terms of salaries, because
it's not salary prices.
You'll see more entrepreneurship, actually.
Wait, so what are you saying?
Yeah,
what is?
That's a good thing.
All right, I'm not
That's
100%. I follow exactly everything you're saying, but
I mean it's having this effect is a good thing because it will encourage the government for more spending for job guarantee, for example, or the make all education free.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate the phone call. Calling from an 810 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
Yes, it is you.
Cool. I just always wanted to say that. This is Dale from Flint.
Dale from Flint. What's on your mind?
I'm calling to make a quick, dumb, pedantic point about Kamala Harris.
Great. Favorite
Whatever her name recognition is, I would argue that it's about 30% of that, given that roughly 2 out of every 3 deep political wonks say her first name incorrectly.
What is her first name?
And
Kamala.
Kamala, not Kamala, not Kamala. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not like a linguist or a racist or anything, so I'm not going to psychologize that. But I think it's interesting that somebody's running for president. They're seen to be the front runner, and most people don't say her name the way that she does.
What is it? It's Kamala, right? Kamala.
Kamala.
All right.
Yeah, it starts with com, like comms. Or
That guy from Ohio. That guy from Ohio, who might be running for president. That senator. How do you say his name?
It's Indiana.
No.
Oh, that's
Ohio.
Booty Judge.
He was the mayor of South
No,
Bend.
I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the other guy, the senator from
He's
Ohio.
being a schmuckle.
No.
He's picking an easy name.
No, I'm not.
To prove a point.
I believe it's pronounced Kamala.
No, wait a second. I'm asking the caller.
Sherrod Brown.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. I needed to speak
I
that
appreciate
up.
that.
Taking too much time.
What's that? Right. Appreciate the call.
Barney Sanders.
I was hoping we'd get a final pronunciation of Buttigieg.
Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown.
Sherrod Brown.
Calling from a 4-2 tray number. 423.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah. Who's this?
Thanks for taking my call. This is Andrew calling from Tennessee.
Andrew, what's on your mind?
And appreciate your commentary. I'm here in the Bible Belt, middle of MAGA country, so thanks for doing what you do.
Well,
just had a question about, I kind of came to you guys through the Jordan Peterson wormhole. Took me about half a day to figure out. I wasn't on that tip, just to find the Joe Rogan podcast where he talks about being on the all meat diet. So I didn't really need your guys' commentary, but I really appreciated it. Let me just say that. Just interested what your kind of take is on if you think at any point that veganism becomes a moral imperative. When we talk about climate change, the Green New Deal, the catastrophic impact on the environment, that's going on right now. I guess that's one of my frustrations generally with the left, and I'm on the left. I'm, I guess to the left of the left on animal rights.
Right.
It seems, because I don't hear a lot of talk about it, barely at all in the mainstream, let alone, and you got, on the left, you got a lot of people pointing out the fossil fuel companies, which totally right to do. I just, basically, at any point, do you think that becomes like a winning strategy or any sort of litmus test, in terms of at least reducing the amount of
in all honesty, like
consumption.
I think we are a ways off from that. I think that it's quite possible.
Right, I agree.
I think it's quite possible that we, as a society, may come to view the eating of meat like in the way that we view slavery now. And I think that's conceivable. I suspect if that happens, it's going to be sort of the reverse of what you're talking about. That climate change is going to make the way that we eat meat unsustainable, and therefore our value system will change along with that. I just think that if climate change happens in the way that I think, statistically speaking, the odds are it will, right? Like, I don't,
right.
If I had to bet right now, I would say unlikely that we as a planetary society are going to be able to mitigate some of the worst impacts of climate change. I think it's going to change, our agriculture and our livestock practices significantly, and it's just as conceivable to me that we will be eating completely manufactured, faux meat. What? Yeah, lab meat, and
right. I think
and then I think as that happens, the moral the moral problems with eating animals will increase.
I have some thoughts on this as someone who was vegan for more than 10 years, vegetarian for like 20, and I'm now like a pescatarian. I'm still mostly vegan, but you're never going to convince people solely on the animal rights tip, right? Because rights, unless you believe they're derived from our creator, right? And even then, not everyone agrees on a creator. There's really no way to prove that anything has rights, right? You either believe animals have rights or you don't.
But if you want to trigger right-wingers in Tennessee, it's a great thing to do.
Well,
yes,
sure. And I would also like to get away from the lifestyle politics aspect of it. But it's something that I struggle with a lot because, I think it is kind of wrong to eat meat. And I do make some decisions in my daily life that are kind of lifestyle politics-y, but it only matters when you do things on a mass structural scale. So I would say rather than focus on the moral aspect or the lifestyle politics aspect of it, I think we should focus on the practical aspects, right? Because the planet cannot sustain the current level of meat production that is happening. So if we were to move to some sort of socialist model where people have control over production, we would have to agree on a mass scale to eat way, way less meat or to transition, like Sam said, to like lab meat and meat substitutes.
There's a little bit of a dilemma in this, but I think step one is we need an agricultural policy in this country that does not promote. Really, it's our subsidies of corn that are really, sort of at the sort of the first building block of all of this. Frankly, the problem is that it becomes somewhat problematic in that you're basically saying we're going to basically price people out of eating meat. Now, and it's
yeah,
only
and
going to be
that's why I hate all of the
wealthy
liberal
people.
arguments about it. Like, oh, you should just make these consumer products more expensive, and then people won't buy them. Only rich people will buy them. Like, that's not cool.
I mean, it is problematic, but it is, I think, like, you know, I don't know what the other first step is, right? Like that is, you know, and I think our subsidy of corn was designed specifically to bring this about. It was to make food throughout the entire our food system, to make it cheaper, so that people would have more money to spend on consumer goods. This was like an explicit endeavor by the Commerce Secretary under Nixon, and it worked. But that's why there's so much corn filler essentially in all our food, and why cows, you know, that's what creates these factory farms. The thing is, if you eliminate,
you took all the corn, oats, wheat, and soy and fed them to people that we feed to animals, you know, there would be no man, woman, or child.
Much of
hungry on
that
the
stuff
face
that
of the
we
planet.
grow
And that's,
is
you know,
not.
at least maybe it starts with us just chewing on you know, the facts like that.
But the reality is that corn that is subsidized by the U.S. government is not for human consumption. It is
Right.
literally we're growing fuel for animals essentially to fatten them up. But yes, if you're going to subsidize stuff, you could subsidize other stuff. Now, conceivably, what could happen, right? Is
absolutely.
you cut those subsidies for a period of time. You know, a wealthier, you know, your average American can only eat meat once, maybe a week or something like that. I mean, like when I was a kid, I remember like the idea of, you know, having steak more than like twice a month was like a big deal. You'd be looking around going like, what's going on? I mean, it was all like, I think chicken at that time or something, or fish maybe. I can't remember, but it was like the idea of steak was like a treat. And, you know, and this was, I remember that as it was, you know, around that time before those subsidies started kicking in. And you know, we were you know, middle class, my dad was a lawyer up, you know, in Worcester, but nevertheless, and so I mean, I think if you were to cut back on those subsidies, it might increase the development of lab meat. And I don't know, it's funny that people think like lab meat is gross when you're like, well, but you're eating.
Yeah, do you know where the
flesh
meat
of
you're
an
eating
animal.
now came from? It's like lives in its own shit in a slaughterhouse.
Thank
you. They're worried about the estrogen in soy and not in the cow's milk.
Right, exactly. Appreciate the call, Andrew.
Cock.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam.
Cock.
We got to democratize control over production, folks.
The
It's
thing
still
ab-
possible that people would vote to destroy the
We
planet.
have one day a week where we don't eat steak in my house.
The thing
Samantha.
about meat being so inexpensive that it might create some problems is also true of automobiles.
Right.
Absolutely.
Do
Bring
we
back
still have that
trains.
Rokahana thing? Is that yeah? Let's play that. This is good. I mean, you know, like again, this is the other part of that, right? We're going to see some. There seems to be a genuine commitment by the Democrats across the board to make drug prices lower and to impose more restrictions on it. The problem is that this is already becoming a trade-off for Medicare for all. But here is Rokahana making the same argument. We heard this last week, I feel like, too, right? Who was arguing? Oh, it was AOC. Made the same argument. Like, you have socialized the cost of development and privatized the profits. And basically, we're all sitting here and we're all like angel investors, except for you're not giving us any returns.
My colleague, Representative Comer, said earlier today that he's concerned that government would have more of a role in medicine. And his concern is that if government has more of a role in medicine, it may hurt, as he put it, our innovation. My colleague, if he cares about innovation, should actually be cheering for government to have a bigger role. I know you're familiar with the study that shows that between 2010 and 2016, of every drug, all 210 drugs that were approved by the FDA were funded by the NIH or public money. Would it be fair to say that most of the foundational research is being done with public dollars, and that, I mean, this is just sort of common sense. If you know the people who go do their MD, PhDs and want to win Nobel Prizes, they tend to go to universities, not becoming general counsels or vice presidents at pharmaceutical companies. I mean, is that not your experience?
Yes, and actually I think that's happening more and more. It used to be the case that a lot of large pharmaceutical companies had really big research arms, but in recent years a lot of those companies have divested from those research arms and instead are looking for the research that's coming out of the academic settings. And I want to also bring back to what other people have said earlier in this hearing about the need for a financial incentive. And actually, a lot of these people at Harvard and at Johns Hopkins, a lot of these scientists go to work every day, and their incentive is to try to cure disease and to make people better and to progress and to develop the progress of science. And they're not thinking about whether or not they can become a billionaire or whatever
Right.
because of that. That's the incentive.
What an odd concept, right? I mean, like members of Congress. I mean, don't you think here most people would think they don't want to make just $1 billion? They're in it for the public good. What an odd concept that someone else may have a similar view.
Yeah, I got some questions about a lot of those Congress people, but in general, I agree with that concept that he's talking about, and that came out of that same hearing that AOC was at, and it's this is the benefit of having the Democrats control the House and having some genuine lefties in the Democratic caucus, ones that attract media attention. Because these narratives are going to keep getting out there in a way that we haven't seen in decades. All right, I get time for one more call, and calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, this is Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
Ronald Reagan is
thanks for the kind gift, by the way.
A new daddy. Oh, you're welcome. He's a dad twice over.
2 kids.
Test stuff. I wanted to talk about politics real quick.
Sure.
I just think that before we can have Medicare for all, we need to have all for Medicare.
Okay.
And
Not getting a lot of sleep,
America is not great because of what we're capable of, but because of what we're not incapable of. And our willingness to challenge notions, risk ideals, and boldly project a future, not only for today, but for tomorrow, is unparalleled, not only in the world today, but in the history of civilization. And we can dream of a tomorrow that not only matches our trajectory of yesterday, but our imaginations of the future. Because we're not the U.S., we are us.
I like that one. You're not getting a lot of sleep, right?
We don't need a Green New Deal. We need a Green New Ideal.
Oh.
And I don't want to live in the United States. I want to live in the Uniting States.
I was thinking of the Starbucks
problem.
green.
The problem I'm seeing is that too many people define themselves not as Americans, but as Americans. So, anyways, I just wanted to challenge you to find the strive inside, to imagine more than previously believed possible by shattering paradigms and climbing ladders of success.
Okay. I'll do that.
And
all right,
don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Look a mouth gift in the horse. Don't bite off more than we can chew.
I got one for you.
Chew off more than we can bite.
What
I'm
if
fucking tired right now.
Can I give you one, Reagan? What if instead of telling time, we listen to it?
Yeah. Anyways, ask not where is the beef. Instead, be the beef you wish to see in the world.
Wait.
Thank you.
How about this one for you? America is great because America is not bad.
He hung up.
Clearly he liked it.
All right, folks. That's it for phone calls. Apologies, but that's a good one to end it on. I know we had people on there for we had a dozen people over on for a hour and a half, and I apologize. Tough stuff. We got. We'll take 6 more IMs, and then we'll see you tonight 8:30. Kentucky Fried Comrade. Hey, I'm our crew. Want to give big thanks for making my first time in NYC a blast. Michael's show was okay too, I guess. There was a story this weekend about cryptocurrency exchange Quadrig where they lost $190 million worth of crypto fund bucks because the owner died with the password to the wallet. I guess this is competition kicking in. Yeah, we saw that story. And I was going to talk about it, but the guy apparently died because he had colitis and was in India trying to set up an orphanage.
So let's not mock that guy.
But
I think maybe we be a little bit classy about that
But we can take a lesson about cryptocurrency.
Well, I think on the next libertarian call, Sam could be like, well, who's going to find the password?
Well,
the government.
Listen. If you have a password that really controls more than, I would say, $650, write it down, put it in your desk. Or maybe put it in a safety deposit box and give your, cousin a key or something. That's all I would say. Thames Darwin. Sam was listening to last night's show. It was great to see you, incidentally, Thames Darwin. And wanted to mention that people interested in the anti-Semitism campaign against Corbyn should find and watch the 4-part Al Jazeera doc called The Lobby. It makes pretty clear what's happening now has been in the works since before Corbyn's initial ascent in labor. Mike Huckabee, Howard Schultz should put on a Kangol hat and turn it backwards whenever he mentions coming from the projects.
Right.
Seriously.
Right.
Lewis, serious question. Why don't one or more of out-of-office Democrats try to run against Trump in the Republican primaries? At a minimum, they might get into a debate and bust his chops. But should Trump be forced out of office before the election thing would be very interesting. I think if you do that, well, I also just think if you do that, you're giving that would get more people to rally around him in some way. All right, 2 more. Black Marxists. What moral distinction do the MR crew make between millionaires and billionaires? Also, as a Sanders supporter, him overshadowing Abrams is bad. Well, I think. Look. I think when you start getting up into the hundreds of millions, I think you also have a problem. But billions are obviously like just sort of an easy slam dunk.
$1 billion is a lot different than $1 million.
But
$1 billion is a lot different than $1 million.
But
Absolutely.
also, I mean, we always have moral arguments for stuff, but my primary argument is practical and structural. So in that sense, I don't differentiate between them because they both got to go.
Sanders supporter, him overshadowing Abrams is bad. I will say this. I don't think that was his intent. The guy has done these for at least 3 or 4 years since. There were 3 other people last year who did the similar thing. I do think, though, that it's not as politically adept as it could be. If you know that there's this narrative out there, this is a fairly unique thing to have the first African American woman to give a direct reply to Trump. I think everyone knows the dynamics of the midterm elections, and I think that it was certainly predictable.
I just want to say I don't think he will end up overshadowing Stacey Abrams. I think she's going to give a great response. I do think, to be honest, in terms of any the pre-one by Kamala is interesting. But this is just also the nature of what it's going to be from now on.
It's
like everybody's going to have their hit. And it makes sense that she's doing a pre-one. It makes sense that Bernie's doing his thing. And I'm primarily the person I am most excited to hear from tonight is Stacey Abrams, both because I like her and I'm actually really curious to see what direction she goes in.
It's just more personality garbage. Like, oh, it's her turn. She deserves the attention. Blah, blah, blah. Like, the more the merrier. Why can't, wouldn't it be great if you got to watch a good response from a Democrat and then another good response from an independent? Shut up.
There's a finite of value to this, and certainly, like, it's not such a foreign thing to me. I mean, like, the idea of, like, there's a performative aspect to this. None of this is policy. This is all just a performance, right? And it's all the reason why she's given that platform. There is value in the platform. It's not just like, oh, she's just giving a speech. It's like, this is going to be an introduction to the country, and this is going to be a way to bring her onto the national stage. To deny there's no doubt in my mind that people are being opportunistic about this and trying to make something out of it that it's not. But also to deny that there's like absolutely that it's manufactured out of whole cloth. Like, I think in certain situations, right, there are things that different people have to be careful of. Some people have pre-existing perspectives that people have. It's called politics, is what it is.
I just feel like attention is not a zero-sum game in this instance, and she and Bernie have worked together before, and they're only going to add to one another. But what do I know?
I don't care.
Okay, Josh from
that joke was kind of funny though.
I didn't. It says I don't have a login. Josh from Houston. My mom recognized you when I played MR in the car because she watches MSNBC, but she observed, and I quote, "Why does his voice sound so much different than TV? Tell us, Sam, why do you save your deep, sultry voice for prime time?" She also thinks you're cute. Ooh. Well, I don't know why my voice sounds different. It doesn't sound different to me. Seawalker.
Doesn't sound different to me.
Meanwhile, 3 hours later, like, well, I think that there's a number of policy sets.
Well, I think she's saying that my voice is
yes.
deeper on TV.
No, I understand.
Tired
I
of
think
billionaires.
when you go faster, your voice gets deeper.
Deeper?
Yeah. Surprisingly, I noticed that when
I thought I'd go higher in the register.
That's what yeah, but I've noticed sometimes, because you do a different voice a little, you have to go through more with Ring of Fire, and for some reason
Ring of Fire, I put on my radio voice.
Right. Sounds a bit deeper
Seawalker. Tired of billionaires moving the goalpost to claim they are definition of American dream. For most of us, it just means having our hard work lead to a modestly comfortable life. Indeed. And the final I am of the day, well, maybe. How is Howard Schultz going to explain his prominent leading role in the war on Christmas? Okay, folks, see you tonight.
Might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. Finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years, while I shifted in and out of gear, waiting for my moment to happen. I don't know how much longer I can stay in, or how much more I got to pay to play in. I know somehow